Hi everybody, Bryan Strawser, Chairman for the Minnesota Gun Owners Caucus and Political Action Committee, and I'm here to talk briefly about our election and grading program that we conduct every election cycle here in Minnesota. First, I want to outline that we're a nonpartisan organization and we're a single issue organization, meaning that the only thing that we're going to focus on is the Second Amendment and the nexus to legislation and public statements that candidates and elected officials make that are within the scope of what we look at as an organization. We don't look at other factors that don't relate to the Second Amendment. Every election cycle, we grade and make endorsement decisions on the following races. Every time that the Minnesota State Legislature is up for election, which is generally every 2 or 4 years, we grade and survey those candidates. So this is Minnesota State Representatives in the House and the Minnesota State Senate. The Senate serves a 2 or 4 year term, depending upon the election cycle, and the House always serves a 2 year term. We also grade and endorse in Minnesota's constitutional officers that have a Second Amendment connection. Minnesota's constitutional officers are the governor and lieutenant governor, the attorney general, the state auditor, and the secretary of state. We look at 2 of those races, governor and lieutenant governor, because that is the executive leader of the state. They decide whether or not to sign or veto legislation. And we look at the attorney general's race because the attorney general represents the state of Minnesota in legal actions. They are both the organization, or the office rather, that we are fighting against when we sue the state or take action against a state statute. And they represent Minnesota before the appellate courts like the United States Supreme Court and the 8th Federal Circuit Court. So we have intersections there as well. We do not grade or endorse in county or local or township races. So we don't look at county attorney and county sheriff. We don't look at city councils or county commissioners or township boards or any of those factors. There's a number of reasons that we limit the scope of what we look at. But the main one is, in most cases, county attorneys have very little direct impact on gun policy, and most of them will not return our survey. And second, county sheriffs are statutorily limited in what they can and can't do around gun laws in Minnesota. And again, most county sheriff candidates do not return our survey. So we stay focused on the state legislature and the governor, lieutenant governor, and the attorney general's race. We also do not grade or endorse in federal races. So that's the United States Congress or President of the United States. We may make comments or provide commentary on the stances of candidates in federal races. We have done this in the past. We did it as recently as the Biden-Trump election in 2020, where we provided insight into both candidates' track records. But again, we do not grade or endorse because we do not maintain a federal political action committee. It's just too much overhead. We would have you look at the national organizations like Gun Owners of America, the Second Amendment Foundation, the Citizens Committee for the Right to Keep and Bear Arms, and the Firearms Policy Coalition. You can also look at the NRA's Institute for Legislative Action and Political Victory Fund. So with that as background, here's our approach. Every year, there's a filing period where candidates can file for office for State House, State Senate, and the constitutional offices. That deadline usually is at the end of May or early June. On the day after that deadline has passed and filings are closed, we mail our election survey to every single candidate that has registered and filed to run in those races statewide. So we mail somewhere between 400 and 600 surveys every election cycle. We send those surveys out through U.S. mail. We request that those surveys be returned by a certain date, and we usually make plans to issue grades and our principal endorsements by the end of June every election cycle. That is our approach. We do not discriminate based on party. Everyone that has filed gets a survey. If they return it or not is up to them. Now, our grades are then based on a number of factors. We have the candidate survey, which is a candidate telling us their yes or no answers and other context on the questions that we ask. We always ask questions related to gun rights. We ask about constitutional carry. We ask about stand your ground. We ask about licensing and registration. We ask about universal background checks. We ask about red flags. We ask about the right to keep and bear arms. We ask about permit to carry reciprocity, and the list goes on. It's a 5 to 6 page survey most years. In order to get a grade of A- or A candidate has to support our legislative priorities. That includes stand your ground and constitutional carry, and they must oppose all gun control legislation that's covered in our survey. We will only give an A- or higher to candidates who do that. And we will only endorse candidates who receive an A- or higher. They have to support our core legislative priorities. They have to oppose all gun control. There are no exceptions to that. Candidates who have a track record, meaning they have a voting record, they've authored or co-authored bills, they're in a leadership role, they will also have their record taken into account for grading and endorsement purposes. Candidates who don't return a survey, we're going to tell you who they are, and we'll grade them on their existing record and other public statements that they have made. We can't make a candidate return a survey, but we can grade them on their public statements, the statements they make on their website and on social media, and we research all of those things every election cycle. In a lot of cases, we may choose not to endorse prior to a party process being resolved. That includes the party endorsement processes for the Republicans and the Democrats, and that might include a primary where there is a difference between candidates. We might wait until that primary election is resolved, but not always. We may choose to make an endorsement. The other thing I would point out is that A+ is a very difficult grade to obtain. A+ go to our champions. They go to people who work day in, day out with us to advance gun rights at the legislature, at the Attorney General's office, and as governor or lieutenant governor. We don't hand out A+ like candy. They have to be earned, and they go to champions. The other thing that we do that's new in 2022 is if a candidate is an incumbent and they're in a leadership position in the Minnesota House or Senate, and they have not worked to move firearms legislation forward, gun rights legislation forward, we're going to take that into account and grade them accordingly. If they've championed that legislation, we're going to take that into account and we're going to grade that accordingly. So that's a little bit about our grading and endorsement criteria. At the end of the day, the caucus issues grades. Those grades go from A to F. Really, I guess I should say A+ to F. Our political fund, the Minnesota Gun Owners Political Action Committee, endorses candidates, and then come election time, we may give money directly to candidates, or we may, and what is more likely, we may spend independently in support of gun rights candidates and against anti-gun candidates. So I hope that's given you some insight into our survey, grading, and endorsement process. As always, if you have questions, you can contact us via email at contact@gunowners.mn.